winter of 1984, the smiling face of a 12-year-old girl from Greeley, Colorado, became a haunting national symbol. In 1984, Jonelle Matthews vanished from her home just 5 days before Christmas, leaving behind an eerie silence and a mystery that would stump investigators for more than 3 decades. Her face was one of the first to appear on milk cartons, part of a new campaign that put missing children into the spotlight in homes across America. The case went cold, a wound in the heart of a small town that just wouldn't heal. But 35 years later, a shocking discovery in a remote field would crack the case wide open. That discovery, combined with the bizarre and obsessive behavior of a former neighbor, would finally point police toward a killer who had been hiding in plain sight all along.
December 20th, 1984, should have been a happy night for Jonelle Matthews. A vibrant 7th grader, she had just performed in a holiday choir concert. After the show, filled with Christmas carols, a friend and her father dropped her off at her family's house at 8:15 p.m. The house was empty. Her father, Jim, was at her older sister's basketball game. Her mother, Gloria, was out of state with a sick relative. For a short window of time, Jonelle was home alone. Around 8:30 p.m., the phone rang. Jonelle answered and took a message for her dad. It was the last time anyone, other than her killer, is known to have spoken with her. When her father got home a little after 9:30 p.m., he walked into a strangely quiet house. The television was on. One of Jonelle's shoes was on the floor, but Jonelle herself was gone. There were no signs of a struggle, no forced entry. It was as if she had just vanished.
A search of the property revealed a single disturbing clue: footprints in the snow outside, which someone had apparently tried to cover up with a garden rake from the family's own garage. The small, safe town of Greeley, Colorado, a place where people didn't feel the need to lock their doors, was suddenly terrified. Parents were holding tighter to their kids, her mother Gloria would later recall. The disappearance of Jonelle Matthews shattered the community's sense of security. If a child could be taken from their own living room, was anyone truly safe? The Greeley Police Department launched a massive investigation, but the first few hours and days gave them little to go on. Suspicion briefly fell on Jonelle's father, Jim, standard procedure, but he was quickly cleared. With no ransom note, no witnesses, and very little physical evidence, the trail started to go cold almost as soon as it began. As days turned into weeks, Jonelle's story became national news. Her face, alongside those of other missing children, became a fixture in American households thanks to the new milk carton campaign. Even President Ronald Reagan mentioned her case, highlighting the anguish of families with missing children. Hundreds of volunteers searched the vast farmlands of Weld County, looking in every ditch and under every bridge, desperate for any sign of the missing girl. But they found nothing.
The years stretched on. For the Matthews family, life was a painful state of limbo. 10 years after she disappeared, they held a memorial service, not to give up hope, but to try and find some peace. We had been resigned to the fact that we would probably never know what happened to her, her father Jim later said. The family eventually moved away from Greeley, finding it too heartbreaking to stay in the house where their daughter was last seen. For over 3 decades, the case file for Jonelle Matthews sat unsolved. It was a ghost story, a local tragedy that parents told their children as a cautionary tale. Investigators chased down leads, but every one of them went nowhere.
The mystery of what happened on that cold December night in 1984 seemed like it would never be solved. The town of Greeley moved on, but the shadow of Jonelle's disappearance never fully lifted. Then, on July 23, 2019, the case broke wide open. A crew of oil and gas workers were digging a pipeline in a rural field in Weld County, about 15 miles southeast of where Jonelle had lived. As their machinery dug into the earth, they unearthed human remains. The Weld County Sheriff's Office was called, and from the very start, the recovery was treated as a homicide investigation. Forensic analysis quickly gave them a stunning answer. The remains included a skull with orthodontic braces, just like the ones Jonelle had. DNA testing soon confirmed it. After 34 and a half years, Jonelle Matthews had been found. Her parents, Jim and Gloria, then retired and living in Costa Rica, got the shocking call from a Greeley police detective. It was a real shock, Gloria remembered, an absolute miracle. The discovery brought both relief and a fresh wave of grief. The family finally knew where their daughter was, but the truth was horrifying. An autopsy revealed that Jonelle had died from a single gunshot wound to her forehead, confirming she had been murdered. The desolate, remote field was a lonely place for a child to be laid to rest. With this grim confirmation, the cold case was instantly back on. For the first time in over 3 decades, investigators had a real crime scene and new evidence. And with all the renewed public attention, a strange name from the past began to surface, a man who seemed to know way too much.
His name was Stephen Pankey. Back when Jonelle disappeared, Pankey lived just 2 miles from the Matthews family and had attended the same church. Over the years, as the case faded from the headlines, Pankey developed a disturbing and very public obsession with it. He repeatedly inserted himself into the investigation, making a series of bizarre and incriminating statements to police and the media. Pankey's behavior was erratic and screamed, "Look at me." He even ran for governor of Idaho twice, a long-shot candidate with no real chance of winning, which only highlighted his unusual public profile. He seemed to crave the spotlight, and the Jonelle Matthews case became his platform. He gave interviews claiming to have secret knowledge about the crime, all while demanding immunity from prosecution in exchange for information. His stories were all over the place, but they contained details that raised major red flags for investigators. The most damning detail? Pankey once told police that a rake had been used to cover the footprints in the snow the night Jonelle disappeared. This was a crucial piece of information that had never been made public. How could he have known that unless he was there? His ex-wife gave police even more startling information. She told them that the day after Jonelle went missing, Pankey suddenly forced the family to take an unplanned trip to California. No discussion, no reason given. They left that day. When they got back, he became obsessed with news coverage of the case and started picking in their yard. Shortly after, a car on their property mysteriously caught fire. Pankey seemed to be playing a long, twisted game with law enforcement. For years, his strange behavior was dismissed as that of an eccentric crank, but after Jonelle's remains were found, investigators took a much harder look. In September 2019, police searched his home in Idaho, and the web finally began to close around the man who had talked his way into being the prime suspect. On October 9, 2020, nearly 36 years after Jonelle vanished, a grand jury indicted Stephen Pankey for her kidnapping and murder. He was arrested and brought to Colorado to finally face justice. The case against him was almost entirely circumstantial. No DNA linking him to the crime, no murder weapon ever found. Prosecutors had to build their case on Pankey's own words and actions over the decades. The first trial began in October 2021. Prosecutors argued that Pankey was a man with a grudge and a twisted obsession with the case. His defense attorney claimed he was just an eccentric guy whose obsessive interest was being misunderstood. Pankey even took the stand, denying everything. The jury was torn. They convicted him on a misdemeanor for false reporting, but couldn't agree on the major charges. Mistrial. For the Matthews family, it was a devastating setback. Another door almost closed, then left open. But the district attorney's office wasn't giving up. They decided to try Pankey again. The retrial began in October 2022. This time, prosecutors sharpened their argument, presenting a clearer timeline of Pankey's incriminating statements and bizarre behavior. They hammered home his knowledge of the Rake, the sudden trip out of state, the fear he instilled in his own family. On October 31st, 2022, the jury reached a verdict. Stephen Pankey was found not guilty of first-degree murder, but guilty of felony murder, guilty of second-degree kidnapping, guilty of false reporting. The felony murder conviction meant the jury believed Jonelle was killed while he was kidnapping her. Justice had finally been delivered. As the verdict was read, Jonelle's mother Gloria wept. "It's a crying of happiness," she told reporters. Jonelle's sister Jennifer looked right at Pankey during his sentencing and said, "You moved on as well, but you were looking back, waiting to see if you'd get caught." Stephen Pankey was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 20 years, meaning he won't be eligible for release until he is 91 years old. For 38 years, he lived as a free man, while the Matthews family lived with their grief. He had taunted investigators and inserted himself into the story of Jonelle's disappearance. But in the end, the truth, pieced together from his own obsessive words and the persistence of a community that never forgot, was more powerful. The case of Jonelle Matthews is a story of a life cut short and a family's unimaginable pain. But it's also a powerful reminder that justice, no matter how long it takes, is always worth fighting for. The discovery of her remains was an absolute miracle, as her father said, but the conviction was the result of decades of tireless work. After nearly 4 decades, Jonelle Matthews could finally rest in peace. This is the Dark Chronicle files, the files they never wanted opened. Subscribe because the next one is already waiting.